In 1656, on a day that would change history forever, a 23-year-old walked the narrow streets of Amsterdam, a manuscript tucked under his arm. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from excitement, because he knew what was written on those pages would shatter 3,000 years of lies, 3,000 years of control, 3,000 years of systematic manipulation of humanity. He stopped before the most powerful synagogue in Europe, took a deep breath, and knew that when he walked out, he would never be the same man. In fact, when he walked out, the world would never be the same. His name was Baruch Spinoza, and what he was about to reveal wasn't just a philosophical discovery. It was the key that would unlock the mental prison where humanity had been locked for millennia. A prison built by men, maintained by men, and benefiting only men. He had uncovered something that the church, the synagogue, and every religious institution in the world desperately prayed would remain buried forever. Something so dangerous, they would rather kill the messenger than let the idea spread. And you are about to discover exactly what that was. Because Spinoza didn't say God didn't exist. He proved something far worse. He proved that the God you know is a political invention. Have you ever wondered why all the world's religions have such a similar structure? Why they all need intermediaries between you and the divine? Why they all demand absolute obedience to men who claim to speak in God's name? Well, Spinoza discovered the answer, and when you know what he discovered, you will never look at a church, mosque, or synagogue the same way again. But first, I need to tell you a story. A story they tried to erase from the history books. It was July 1656. Amsterdam was bustling with global trade. Jews expelled from Spain had built one of the most prosperous communities in Europe. Among them, a prominent Portuguese merchant family, the Spinozas. Baruch Spinoza grew up studying the Torah, the Talmud, and all the sacred texts of Judaism. His notes were impeccable, his memory extraordinary. His teachers saw him as a brilliant future religious leader, but there was something different about him. Something that started as a minor intellectual itch and grew into an all-consuming obsession. At 16, he asked his first dangerous question. At 18, he was asking questions that made his masters uncomfortable. At 20, he was asking questions that shouldn't be asked. And at 22, he discovered that his questions had an answer that would destroy everything. If God is infinite, Spinoza questioned during his nocturnal studies, how can he be separate from his creation? Silence filled the room. If God is perfect, he continued, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous curiosity, why would he need worship? The rabbis exchanged worried glances. If God is loving, he insisted, ignoring the growing discomfort around him, why did he create hell? And then, the question that changed everything. If God knows everything that will happen, why does he get angry when things happen exactly as he knew they would? The silence that followed wasn't just discomfort, it was panic, because Spinoza had touched the exposed nerve of all organized religion, the fundamental contradiction that supports the entire system of control. At first, his masters tried to answer with evasions. God's ways are mysterious, they said. Then, they tried to answer with authority. It's not our place to question, they insisted. Then they tried to answer with threats. Doubt is sin, they warned. But Spinoza had discovered something terrible, something that kept him awake at night, writing furiously by candlelight. He realized that the God described in the Bible not only doesn't make logical sense, he makes political sense. Think with me for a moment. If God is truly infinite, omnipresent, and eternal, as the Bible claims, then he cannot be somewhere. He has to be everywhere. He has to be everywhere. If God is truly perfect, he cannot desire anything because desire implies lack, and perfection cannot have lack. If God is truly eternal, he cannot change his mind, because change implies time, and eternity is beyond time. But then, who is this God who gets angry, who repents, who makes deals, who punishes and rewards? This God who behaves exactly like a temperamental human king? Spinoza looked at these contradictions and had a revelation that sent his teachers into a panic. The God of the Bible is not God. He is a human projection of political power. Imagine the scene. It's a humid July morning in Amsterdam. The Portuguese synagogue is filled with bearded men in dark cloaks. their voices echoing in Hebrew and Judeo-Spanish through the stone walls. Spinoza enters through the main door. Each step resonates. Like a hammer hitting the growing silence, conversations stop, eyes turn, the air grows heavy. He walks to the center of the room, where the most respected rabbis in Europe are seated in their ornate chairs, men who controlled not only the souls, but the purses and political decisions of thousands of prosperous Jews. Rabbi Mortera, the leader of the congregation, a man whose words could ruin entire families with a single statement, leans forward. "Baruch," he says, in a voice that mixes authority. "And warning, we hope you have come here to recant the dangerous ideas you have been spreading through our community." Spinoza looks around the room. He sees faces he's known since childhood, men who taught him to read Hebrew, men who blessed him at his bar mitzvah, men who expected him to become one of them. And then, with a calmness that leaves everyone disconcerted, he opens the manuscript he brought with him. "Respected rabbis," he begins, and his voice is firm as a rock. "I have not come here to recant. I have come here to prove something you already know, but are afraid to admit." Now the silence in the room becomes almost solid. You do not worship God. You worship a man-made idol created by men who want to control other men. And the explosion of outrage that follows can be heard 3 blocks away. Shouts in Hebrew, fists pounding the table. Some men rise as if to attack him physically, but Spinoza remains motionless in the center of the storm. And when the chaos finally subsides, he continues with a serenity that is chilling. "This idol you call God has very convenient characteristics for you, doesn't it?" Because Spinoza hadn't just attacked a belief, he had attacked the entire system, all the power, the structure that kept those men in power. And not just them, the entire global religious hierarchy. You see, what Spinoza discovered wasn't merely philosophical, it was a perfect social engineering scheme that had been working for millennia. Think like an architect of control. How do you dominate millions without armies? How do you make them work for you voluntarily? How do you make them defend your system even when that system harms them? Simple. You create an invisible God with very specific characteristics. A God who is always watching but can never be observed. A God who constantly judges, but whose criteria for judgment can only be interpreted by you. A God who loves conditionally. He only loves those who obey the rules that you establish. A God who punishes severely. And coincidentally, you are the one who applies the punishments in his name. A God who rewards generously. And coincidentally, you control how those rewards are distributed. Do you see the pattern? It's like a card game where one person makes the rules, deals the cards, counts the points, and decides who wins. Spinoza looked at this system and had a revelation that sent religious leaders into absolute panic. He realized that the God described in the sacred texts had more in common with a human dictator than with an infinite cosmic force. This God had an ego. He got jealous, he changed his mind, he made political deals. He chose favorite peoples based on tribal criteria. He demanded financial tributes. In other words, he behaved exactly like an earthly king who wanted to be worshipped, and the representatives of this God on earth. Coincidentally, they lived like kings, golden palaces, luxurious clothes, absolute power over the life and death of their subjects. But here's the most brilliant part of the system. It's self-perpetuating. The more people suffer, the more they need spiritual consolation. The more spiritual consolation they seek, the more dependent they become on the providers of that consolation. The more dependent they become, the more power they give to the providers. The more power the providers have, the more they can create situations that make people suffer. And the cycle repeats, generation after generation. Century after century. It's the perfect business. You create the problem and sell the solution. You inflict the wound and sell the remedy. You generate fear and sell protection. Do you see the pattern? Spinoza did, and he understood that he was looking at the oldest and most efficient system of social control ever invented. Create an invisible God. Say that only you can speak to him. Say he demands obedience. Punish those who disobey. Reward those who obey. Keep the people dependent on you for access to the divine. There you have it. You have absolute power over entire crowds. But Spinoza went further, much further. He didn't just expose the problem, he offered the most revolutionary solution ever conceived. For months after that confrontation in the synagogue, he locked himself in his room. He ate little. He slept even less. He spent his nights studying not only religious texts, but mathematics, physics, astronomy. He was searching for God, the true God, not the political character invented by men, but the real force behind existence. And one winter morning, while watching snowflakes fall through the window, he had the revelation that would change everything. Each snowflake followed perfect physical laws. Each ice crystal formed according to precise mathematical patterns. There was no whim, no temperamental mood, no favoritism, only laws. Laws that worked with absolute consistency. The same laws that made the planets revolve, the same laws that made his heart beat, the same laws that made light travel and music sound, and he realized that was God. Not an anthropomorphic character sitting on a cloud, but the very logical structure of reality. The force that made the universe exist from nothing, the intelligence that organized atoms into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into conscious organisms capable of contemplating their own existence. This force didn't have an ego because it was too infinite to need validation. It didn't get angry because it was too perfect to feel threatened. It didn't make political deals because it was too universal to have favorites. It didn't demand worship because it was too complete to need anything external. If you want to know God truly, he said to the rabbis in that stuffy room, his words cutting through the air like a blade, stop looking in books written by men. Look at nature. Look at reality. Use the reason God gave you. And then he said something that made their blood run cold. Because the true God is not hidden behind complicated rituals and mysterious interpretations that only you can make. He is right in front of you, all the time, available to anyone who has the courage to open their eyes. Because the true God, according to Spinoza, wasn't hidden behind complicated rituals and mysterious interpretations. He was right in front of you. All the time, God, Spinoza said, is reality itself, its nature. It's the laws that govern the universe. It's the mathematical logic that makes the stars shine and the planets revolve. This God has no ego. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't throw tantrums. He doesn't need worship. He doesn't choose favorite peoples. He doesn't ask for money. This God simply is. And anyone, using their natural reason, can know him directly, without intermediaries, without interpretations, without anyone's permission. Can you imagine why this sent the religious leaders into a panic? If Spinoza was right, the entire structure of religious power would collapse overnight. There would be no more need for priests, rabbis, pastors, or imams. There would be no more need for religious institutions. There would be no more need for tithes, offerings, or donations. People could connect with the divine on their own. This was more dangerous than atheism. At least atheism left religion as an option. What Spinoza was proposing made organized religion completely obsolete. 3 weeks after that meeting, on a grey August morning, a man dressed in black knocked on the door of the Spinoza family home. Baruch opened the door and found a sealed envelope with the official seal of the congregation. His hands trembled slightly as he took it, not from fear, from anticipation, because he knew exactly what was inside, the cherem, the most severe decree of excommunication ever issued by the Amsterdam Jewish community. But when he opened the envelope and began to read, he realized it wasn't just an excommunication. It was an attempt at social assassination. The document didn't just banish him from the religious community, it ordered that Spinoza be treated as if he were dead. Let no one communicate with him either orally or in writing, the decree stated. Let no one do him any favor. Let no one stay with him under the same roof. Let no one approach him within less than 4 cubits. Let no one read anything composed or written by him. 4 cubits, about 6 feet, the exact distance one kept from a decomposing corpse. But there was more, much more. The decree continued with a curse that chilled even Spinoza to the bone. May he be cursed by day and cursed by night, cursed when he lies down and cursed when he rises, cursed when he goes out and cursed when he enters. It was as if they were trying to erase his existence, not just from the community, but from reality itself. That same afternoon, something extraordinary happened. His younger sister, Rebecca, came home weeping. Neighbors had shouted at her in the street, calling her the sister of the heretic. His mother, a deeply religious woman, looked at Spinoza with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Why did you do this to us?" His father, a respected merchant whose business depended entirely on the Jewish community, simply said, "You have until sunset to leave this house." At 23 years old, Spinoza lost not only his religion, he lost his family, his friends, his community, his social identity, and his livelihood. He became, literally, a ghost walking the streets of Amsterdam. People who had known him since childhood crossed the street when they saw him. Merchants refused to sell him food. Landlords refused to rent him rooms. The Jewish community of Amsterdam numbered around 4,000 people. It was practically a city within a city. And overnight, these 4,000 people were instructed to treat him as if he didn't exist. Any normal person would have caved, would have begged for forgiveness, would have publicly recanted, would have done anything to return to the comfort and safety of the community. But Spinoza was not a normal person. Instead of despairing, he smiled. Instead of repenting, he felt liberated. Instead of backing down, he decided to definitively prove he was right. But what happened next is even more fascinating. Instead of recanting, instead of begging forgiveness, instead of retreating from his ideas, Spinoza did something extraordinary. He decided to prove he was right. Over the next 20 years, living in small rooms on the outskirts of different Dutch towns, supporting himself solely by crafting lenses for telescopes and microscopes, Spinoza did something that had never been done before in human history. He mapped, with mathematical precision, how the universe really works. Imagine the scene. A lone man, working 14 hours a day polishing glass with diamond dust to make the most perfect lenses in Europe. His hands calloused, his lungs damaged by the glass dust he constantly breathed. But in the wee hours of the morning, when the world slept, he wrote. By the light of candles he made himself to save money. He scribbled equations, diagrams, and theorems that would reveal the deepest secrets of existence. He was writing ethics, but it wasn't just a philosophy book. It was an engineering manual for reality. He organized his findings like Euclid organized geometry, precise definitions, unquestionable axioms, logically derived propositions, irrefutable mathematical demonstrations. But what he was demonstrating weren't theorems about triangles. They were theorems about God, about the human mind, about emotions, and about freedom, about eternity. And each theorem was more dangerous than the last. Theorem 1. God and nature are the same thing. There is no separation. Theorem 2. Everything that exists is a modification of God, including you. Theorem 3. Your mind is literally part of God's infinite mind. Theorem 4. Free will is an illusion created by ignorance of the causes that determine our actions. Theorem 5. Good and evil are human perspectives, not cosmic categories. Theorem 6. Death is merely a transformation, not an extinction. Theorem 7. True happiness comes from understanding your own eternal nature. Every page he wrote was a bomb that would explode the foundations of all organized religion. But here's what almost no one tells you about this period of Spinoza's life. He couldn't publish ethics while he was alive. The manuscript was too dangerous, too revolutionary, too subversive. Publishers refused to print it. Authorities forbade its circulation. Even close friends begged him not to publish. Why? Because Spinoza hadn't just attacked Judaism, he had attacked Christianity too, and Islam, and every form of organized religion that had ever existed in human history. He showed that they all followed the same basic pattern. They all used the same fundamental trick. They all created the same kind of political God to justify the same kind of social control. And the most disturbing part of all? He proved mathematically that this wasn't an accident. It was intentional design. For 3,000 years, from Abraham to the present day, a small group of shrewd men had discovered the perfect formula for controlling large populations without needing armies or physical force. Create an invisible God. Claim that only you can interpret him. Keep people dependent on that interpretation through fear and hope. Profit endlessly from that dependence. It was the most lucrative business in history, and Spinoza had exposed every detail of how it worked. The manuscript circulated in absolute secrecy among a tiny circle of European intellectuals. Every person who received a copy knew that possessing it could mean imprisonment, torture, or death. Philosophers copied entire chapters by hand, and destroyed them after memorizing. Scientists discussed the ideas in code during clandestine meetings. Revolutionaries used the principles to plan resistance movements. It was as if an intellectual virus was silently spreading across Europe. A virus that infected minds with an impossible-to-forget idea. You don't need anyone's permission to access the divine, because Spinoza hadn't just attacked Judaism. He had attacked Christianity too, and Islam, and every form of organized religion that had ever existed. He showed that they all followed the same pattern. They all used the same trick. They all created the same kind of political god to justify the same kind of social control. And the most disturbing thing? He proved it worked. For 3,000 years, from Abraham to the present day, billions of people surrendered their spiritual autonomy to men who claimed a special connection to the divine. Billions paid tithes to build grand temples for these intermediaries. Billions fought and died defending specific interpretations of these political texts disguised as divine revelation. Billions lived in fear of a temperamental God who existed only in the imaginations of those profiting from that fear. But Spinoza also showed the way back. He proved that true spirituality needs no fear, no guilt, no intermediaries, no money, no complicated rituals. True spirituality is your direct connection to reality. It's the recognition that you are part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than any story invented by men who crave your power. Because God, the true God, isn't in some distant temple ruled by other men. He's in your breath right now, and he's in the mathematics that makes your heart beat. He's in the physics that holds the atoms of your body together. He's in the logic that allows your thoughts to form. He is the force that brought the universe into existence from nothing. And you are part of that force, not a servant of it, not a subject of it, an expression of it. That's what Spinoza discovered. That's what they tried to hide. That's what you have a right to know. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, it gets even more disturbing, because when Spinoza died, in 1677, his friends published The Ethics, secretly, and something extraordinary happened. The ideas began to spread, first among philosophers, then among scientists, then among revolutionaries. Do you know who read Spinoza obsessively? The founding fathers of American democracy. Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, all had copies of Spinoza in their personal libraries. Do you know who else? The leaders of the French Revolution. Voltaire called Spinoza the first virtuous atheist in history. And do you know what else? Each of these revolutionary movements directly attacked the power of the church. Coincidence? Or the virus of Spinoza's ideas finally infecting the world? But here's where the story gets really frightening. While these political revolutions were happening, something else was happening behind the scenes. The church was adapting, and in a way, more intelligent and sinister than Spinoza could have ever imagined. They realized they could no longer maintain total control through pure religious fear. The genie was out of the bottle. People were starting to question divine authorities. So they did something brilliant. If they couldn't control people through God, they would control them through secular substitutes for God. They began to systematically infiltrate every institution capable of shaping human thought. First, education. They established universities with curricula that taught people to be intellectually dependent on experts. They created a system where you couldn't have a valid opinion on any topic without the appropriate credential. Second, politics. They developed ideologies that functioned exactly like religions, but without mentioning God directly. Communism, fascism, socialism, neoliberalism, all promise salvation through obedience to a specific doctrine interpreted by a secular priestly class. Third, the economy. They transformed money into the new divinity, an invisible power that controls everyone's life, but which can only be interpreted by economists, bankers, and financial experts. Fourth, the media. They created information systems that keep people in a permanent state of anxiety and dependence on news, interpreted by journalists and commentators who function as new priests. Fifth, medicine. They established a medical orthodoxy, where questioning official treatments is treated as heresy, and where health is seen as something that can only be obtained through credentialed intermediaries. Sixth, science. They perverted the scientific method into a new religion where scientific consensus replaces religious dogma, and where questioning established orthodoxies can destroy academic careers. The same system, the same techniques, just with new names and new uniforms, create a class of experts who claim to have special knowledge about mysterious forces, keep people in a state of emotional dependence on these interpretations, punish those who question through social ostracism, reputation destruction, or financial ruin, reward those who obey with status, access to resources, and social approval, profit endlessly from this artificial dependence. It was the same game Spinoza had exposed in 1670, just adapted for a secular age, and it worked. For centuries, it worked perfectly. Billions of people surrendered their intellectual autonomy to economists who can't predict financial crises. Billions surrendered their political autonomy to politicians who serve interests other than those of the people. Billions surrendered their medical autonomy to pharmaceutical industries that profit from chronic illness. Billions surrendered their informational autonomy to media corporations that profit from division and conflict. Billions surrendered their educational autonomy to systems that produce conformity instead of critical thinking. The same pattern Spinoza identified in ancient religions was operating in all the major institutions of modern society, until today, until you discover what Spinoza really said. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer unsee it. Once you understand how the game works, you can no longer play it unconsciously. Once you recognize your own inner divinity, you can no longer surrender your power to men who pretend to speak for God. But there's more, much more. Because what Spinoza discovered about the political nature of God was only the beginning. He also uncovered a truth about the nature of reality that will completely change how you see your own life. He discovered that free will is an illusion, that good and evil are human constructs, that death isn't what you think it is, and that you possess far more power than you ever imagined. Let me tell you a story that will fundamentally alter your perception of every decision you make in your life, every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every choice you make. It was 1665. The bubonic plague was ravaging Europe like a cosmic scythe. London lost 100,000 inhabitants in a single year. Paris was a ghost town. Amsterdam reeked of death and burning disinfectant. People barred their doors, clutched rosaries with tears in their eyes, and desperately hoped God would have mercy on their sinful souls. They believed the plague was divine punishment, that if they prayed hard enough, confessed their sins sincerely enough, performed penance with sufficient suffering, perhaps God would change his mind. Meanwhile, in a small room on the outskirts of Amsterdam, with windows sealed against the pestilential air, Spinoza was discovering something that would render all those desperate prayers utterly unnecessary. He was discovering that there is no accident in the universe, that every event, every occurrence, every movement of every particle of matter, every thought forming in your mind at this very moment, was determined by an infinitely complex chain of causes, stretching back to the first moment of creation, including your decision to continue watching this video, including the feeling you're having right now as you hear these words, including the next thought that will cross your mind. Does this frighten you? It should, because if Spinoza was right, then everything you believe about guilt, merit, punishment, personal responsibility, and free will is an elaborate illusion. But it also signifies something far more powerful, something that can transform your life in ways you can't yet imagine. Because when Spinoza said there is no free will, he wasn't saying you're a programmed robot incapable of change. He was saying something infinitely more sophisticated and liberating. He was saying you are part of an infinitely complex and perfectly logical cosmic machine called reality. And when you understand how this machine works, when you truly grasp the laws governing your own internal functioning, you can use that knowledge to completely reprogram your life experience. But it also means something far more powerful, something that can completely transform your life. You see, when Spinoza said there is no free will, he wasn't saying you are a robot. He was saying something far more sophisticated. He was saying you are part of an infinitely complex and perfectly logical machine called reality. And when you understand how this machine works, you can use that knowledge to create extraordinary results. Think of it this way. If you knew exactly which causes produce which effects in your life, you could manipulate those causes to produce the effects you desire. If you knew exactly how your thoughts are formed, you could form different thoughts. If you knew exactly how your emotions are created, you could create different emotions. If you knew exactly how your habits develop, you could develop different habits. This isn't control over the universe, it's understanding of the universe. And understanding is power. But the religious leaders didn't want you to have that power. They wanted you to believe you were powerless. They wanted you to believe your life was controlled by mysterious forces only they could interpret. They wanted you to believe you needed their permission to be happy, prosperous, or spiritually fulfilled. Spinoza destroyed this lie with surgical precision. He showed that you don't need anyone's permission to understand the laws governing your own existence. And when you understand those laws and you become free in a way no religion ever promised, free from guilt, free from fear, free from the emotional dependency on external validation. But there's more, much more. Spinoza discovered something about what you call good and evil that will completely shatter your worldview. For months he observed everything around him with the cold curiosity of a scientist studying natural phenomena. He observed ants building colonies. There was no morality involved, just instincts programmed by evolution following predictable patterns. He observed storms destroying houses. There was no malice, just weather systems following inexorable physical laws. He observed diseases killing innocent people. There was no cosmic injustice, just microscopic organisms following their biological programming of survival and reproduction. He observed people doing things they called good and bad, and he perceived something revolutionary. The same actions were classified as good or bad, depending entirely on who was making the judgment. Killing was evil when done by criminals, but good when done by soldiers defending their country. Lying was sinful when done by merchants, but virtuous when done by spies protecting national secrets. Sex was impure when done outside marriage, but sacred when done within it. Accumulating wealth was greed when done by merchants, but responsibility when done by family heads. He realized that good and evil don't exist in nature. They never have. They are completely artificial categories invented by human groups to control the behavior of other human groups. A hurricane isn't evil when it destroys a city. It's just a weather system following physical laws. A virus isn't evil when it infects organisms. It's just a biological entity following its evolutionary programming. A predator isn't evil when it hunts prey. It's just an animal following survival instincts. Evil is simply the name humans give to events that harm or frighten them. And good? It's just the name they give to events that benefit or please them. Does this mean morality is completely subjective? That there's no difference between helping and harming? That anything goes? Not exactly. Spinoza discovered something far more interesting and useful. He discovered that there is an objective, scientific, measurable way to evaluate actions and choices, but it's not based on divine commandments written by men who died thousands of years ago. It's not based on moral codes imposed by authorities who benefit from your obedience. It's based on a very simple yet revolutionary question. Does this increase or decrease your power to act in the world? This question changes everything. If a belief makes you more capable, more creative, healthier, more prosperous, more connected with other people, more able to create value in the world, then it's good for you, regardless of what any sacred book, priest, guru, or authority says about it. If a belief makes you less capable, less creative, less healthy, less prosperous, more isolated, less able to contribute positively, then it's bad for you. Regardless of how holy or traditional it may seem, if an action increases your ability to solve problems, create beauty, generate prosperity, form healthy relationships, develop skills, then it's good, even if it goes against age-old traditions. If an action decreases your ability to function effectively in the world, then it's bad, even if it's approved by religious leaders and moral authorities. Can you see how completely revolutionary this is? Suddenly, you no longer need to consult ancient books written by men who never knew your specific situation to decide how to live your life. You no longer need priests, pastors, rabbis, imams, or gurus to tell you what's right or wrong. You no longer need external moral codes that were designed to benefit people who aren't even alive anymore. You have an internal moral compass that works perfectly in real time, your own increasing or decreasing power. And this compass never lies. It always tells you, with scientific precision, whether you're on the right track or straying off course. When you're making choices that increase your real power, you feel energized, inspired, confident, optimistic. When you're making choices that decrease your real power, you feel drained, confused, anxious, depressed. Your own body and mind become moral navigation instruments more precise than any sacred text. This question changes everything. If a belief makes you more capable, more creative, healthier, more prosperous, more connected with other people, then it's good for you, regardless of what any authority says. If a belief makes you less capable, less creative, less healthy, less prosperous, more isolated, then it's bad for you, regardless of how holy it may seem. If an action increases your ability to create value in the world, then it's good, even if it goes against ancient traditions. If an action decreases your ability to create value in the world, then it's bad, even if it's approved by religious leaders. Can you see how revolutionary this is? Suddenly, you no longer need to consult ancient books written by dead men to decide how to live your life. You no longer need priests, pastors, rabbis, or gurus to tell you what's right or wrong. You have an internal moral compass that works perfectly, your own increasing or decreasing power. And this compass never lies. It always tells you if you're on the right path or not. But here's where it gets really interesting. Spinoza discovered that when you stop living according to external moral codes and start living according to your own increasing power, something magical happens. You naturally become more ethical, more compassionate, more generous, more helpful to other people, not out of fear of punishment, not out of hope of reward, but because that's what powerful human beings naturally do. This is what Spinoza called joy, the feeling you have when your power to exist is growing, and the opposite, sadness, depression, anxiety, is what you feel when your power to exist is diminishing. This means that happiness is not a matter of luck or divine blessing. It's a matter of alignment with the natural laws that govern human growth. And these laws can be studied, understood, and applied, like any other science. But there's more. What Spinoza discovered about death will transform how you see every moment of your life. He realized that the fear of death is the root of almost all human suffering. Fear of not having enough time, fear of not being remembered, fear of not having meaning, fear that everything will be useless in the end. And religious leaders have exploited this fear mercilessly. They created elaborate stories about what happens after death. Heaven, hell, reincarnation, purgatory, all designed to keep you terrified and dependent on their interpretation of how to avoid the terrible fate they themselves invented. Spinoza looked at this system and had another disturbing revelation. Death, as you understand it, does not exist. Let me explain it. You are not your body. Your body is just the temporary configuration of matter you're using right now. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are just temporary patterns of neural energy you're experiencing right now. You are not your emotions. Your emotions are just temporary chemical responses to stimuli you're perceiving right now. So what are you? According to Spinoza, you are a unique and unrepeatable expression of the infinite force that created the universe. This force, it doesn't die. It can't die. It is eternal. What dies is just a specific configuration of that force, like a wave that dissolves into the ocean. The wave disappears, but the water remains, and the configuration changes, but the substance persists. And here's the most fascinating part. Spinoza showed that the more you understand your true nature, the more you experience your own eternity. Now, in this moment, while you're alive, you stop identifying with the temporary, your body, your thoughts, your circumstances, and start identifying with the eternal, your capacity to understand, create, and love. This isn't a belief. It's a direct experience that anyone can have through the correct application of reason and intuition. And when you have this experience, the fear of death simply disappears. Not because you believe you're going somewhere afterward, but because you realize you're already in the eternal place now. This is what Spinoza called beatitude, the state of permanent joy that comes from understanding your own eternal nature. And this is what organized religions have always tried to sell you, but never managed to deliver, because they taught you to seek eternity outside of yourself, in distant heavens and in future lives, in post-mortem rewards. Spinoza teaches you to find eternity within yourself, now, in this life, in this moment. But wait, the story gets even more incredible, because everything Spinoza discovered in 1670 is being confirmed by modern science. Quantum physics shows that the observer, and the observed are inseparable. Exactly as Spinoza said about the relationship between mind and matter, neuroscience shows that free will is an illusion created by the brain. Exactly as Spinoza predicted, positive psychology has discovered that well-being doesn't come from temporary pleasure, but from sustainable personal growth, exactly what Spinoza called joy. Evolutionary biology shows that cooperation, not competition, is the primary force behind human development. Exactly what Spinoza said about natural ethics. A man who lived 350 years ago, using only pure logic and careful observation, arrived at the same conclusions that our best scientists are reaching today. How is this possible? Because Spinoza wasn't inventing theories. He was discovering natural laws, laws that have always existed, laws that have always worked, laws that work for you at this very moment, even if you've never heard of them. And here's the most powerful thing of all. These laws can be applied practically to transform any area of your life. Relationships, career, health, creativity, purpose, accomplishments. Everything works according to the same principles that Spinoza mapped out. When you understand these principles, when you really understand them, your life changes in a way that seems almost miraculous, not because you're using magic, but because you're finally cooperating with reality instead of fighting against it. You stop wasting energy trying to control things you can't control. You begin to focus all your energy on the things you really can influence. You stop seeking external validation and begin to generate internal validation. You stop depending on luck and begin to create your own opportunities. You stop fearing the future and begin to build the future. You stop feeling like a victim of circumstances and begin to feel like the author of your own story. This doesn't happen overnight. Spinoza took 20 years to fully develop these ideas, but when it happens, when you truly embody this understanding, it's like waking up from a dream that lasted decades, a dream where you believed you were small, limited, dependent on external forces for your happiness and fulfillment, and you awaken to realize that you were always far more powerful than you ever imagined. Not powerful in the sense of dominating other people, powerful in the sense of mastering yourself, not powerful in the sense of controlling external events, powerful in the sense of controlling your responses to external events, not powerful in the sense of avoiding challenges, powerful in the sense of growing through challenges. And that is the true freedom that Spinoza discovered. Freedom that no government can take from you, freedom that no institution can control, freedom that no circumstance can diminish, the freedom to be who you truly are, the freedom to fully develop your unique potential, the freedom to contribute to the world in the way only you can contribute. But here's the most disturbing part of this whole story. The same forces that tried to silence Spinoza in 1656 are still operating today. They've just changed form. Instead of religious excommunication, we now have social cancellation. Instead of the Inquisition, we now have algorithmic censorship. Instead of book burning, we now have information suppression. Instead of religious dogma, we now have ideological orthodoxy. The methods have changed. The goal remains the same: to keep you dependent on external authorities for your understanding of reality, to keep you afraid to question official narratives, to keep you focused on artificial conflicts that prevent you from discovering your true power. But there's a fundamental difference between today and Spinoza's time. Today, you have access to his ideas. Today, you can study the principles he discovered. Today, you can apply these principles to your own life and see the results for yourself. You don't need to believe anything I've said. You can test everything. Try living as if you were a unique expression of the universe's creative force. Try making decisions based on what increases your power to act, not on what other people expect of you. Try relating to challenges as opportunities for growth, not as divine punishments. Try seeking understanding instead of confirmation. Try creating value instead of consuming entertainment. Try connecting with your eternal nature instead of identifying only with temporary circumstances, and see what happens. See if your life doesn't begin to transform in ways you didn't even know were possible. See if you don't begin to experience a sense of freedom, purpose, and joy that no religion has ever been able to give you. See if you don't begin to understand why Spinoza smiled when he was excommunicated, because he knew something his persecutors didn't know. He knew that truth doesn't need approval to be true. He knew that reality doesn't need permission to function. He knew that you don't need intermediaries to access your own divine power. And now you know too. You know that behind every institution that demands your blind obedience, there is the same pattern that Spinoza exposed 350 years ago. You know that behind every expert who claims to have special knowledge that you can't question, there is the same power dynamic that he mapped out in the Amsterdam synagogue. You know that behind every system that makes you feel small, dependent, and in need of external approval, there is the same social engineering that has kept humanity enslaved for millennia. The door that has been kept locked for 350 years is finally open. On the other side, there is not a temperamental God sitting on a golden throne waiting to judge you for sins that other men defined. There is an entire universe of possibilities waiting to support you in the complete realization of your unique potential. There is an infinite cosmic force of which you are an irreplaceable expression waiting to manifest through your life. There is a universal intelligence that created galaxies and atoms waiting to operate through your mind. There's a wellspring of creativity, the source of music and mathematics, waiting to flow through your actions. You are not a cosmic accident, lost in an indifferent universe. You are not a sinner in need of salvation from human intermediaries. You are not a helpless victim of circumstance, waiting for external miracles. You are the creative force of the universe itself, temporarily focused on a specific point in space and time that are called your life. And when you truly understand this, when you embody this understanding at a cellular level, when you live from this fundamental truth, your life becomes a work of art. Your relationships become expressions of unconditional love. Your work becomes a form of sacred service. Your challenges become opportunities for spiritual growth. Your death becomes merely a transition to a new form of existence. This isn't a belief you need to accept. It's a reality you can experience directly, today, now, this very moment. The only question that remains is one that has echoed through the corridors of history since that July morning in Amsterdam, when a 23-year-old decided to speak a truth that would change the world. Do you have the courage to be free? Do you have the courage to think for yourself? Do you have the courage to question any authority that demands your obedience without demonstrating that it deserves it? Do you have the courage to discover who you truly are, beneath all the layers of conditioning placed upon you since birth? Do you have the courage to live as if you were a unique and precious expression of the force that created the stars? Because if you do, if you really have that courage, then Spinoza did not die in vain. Then his excommunication was not in vain. Then his 20 years of isolation and suffering were not in vain, because he did all of that so that you could have this choice, the choice to be free, the choice to be powerful, the choice to be divine, not in the sense of being better than other human beings, but in the sense of recognizing that you are what humans always were, but forgot, a conscious expression of God exploring itself through human experience. And that is the truth they tried to hide for 350 years. Now it's yours. What will you do with it?